Her love story with her director started on this movie set, and it ended so badly that when she died, the news was kept quiet for 6 weeks. We'll tell you exactly who and exactly what happened later in this video. 50 years ago, Clint Eastwood turned a revenge western into one of the greatest films of his career. But behind the camera, this cast lived lives just as dramatic as anything on screen. Comebacks, heartbreak, one actor who found fame at 71, and only a small handful of them left to tell the story. Clint Eastwood as Josey Wales. He played a Missouri farmer turned outlaw after Union soldiers murder his family, a man so hardened by grief that a rattlesnake practically has to get out of his way. Clint Eastwood didn't just star in this film, he directed it, and it became the movie that convinced Hollywood he was more than a squinting gunslinger. He was a real filmmaker. He shot it fast and cheap, largely improvising scenes with his co-stars on location in Arizona, Utah, and Wyoming, and the result grossed over 10 times its budget. Here's the part most fans don't know. This movie also began the most talked-about relationship of Eastwood's life. He met his co-star on this set, and their years together would later blow up into one of the ugliest legal battles in Hollywood history. We'll get to her story soon. As for Eastwood himself, he's the reason this whole cast is worth revisiting. As of 2026, he's 96 years old, and according to his son Kyle, he's finally quietly retired after directing more than 40 films across 7 decades. His last picture, Juror, came out in 2024. He's outlived nearly every person you're about to meet, and by the end of this video, you'll understand just how rare that makes him. Chuff Dan George as Lone Waddy. He played Lone Waddy, the dry-witted old Cherokee man who becomes Josey's closest friend and comic relief, the one character in the film who can match Wales line for line and somehow always wins. Here's the detail that makes his casting remarkable. Chief Dan George didn't become an actor until he was 60 years old. Before that, he spent decades as a longshoreman, a construction worker, and a school bus driver on a reserve in North Vancouver. He only auditioned for acting after being cast almost by accident in a CBC series, and that led to Little Big Man in 1970, a role that made him, 71, the first Indigenous actor ever nominated for an Academy Award. But the story has a quieter, sadder side. His wife Amy died just weeks before that Oscar ceremony, and by his family's account, he never fully recovered from the loss. He kept working anyway, taking the role in Josey Wales 6 years later and continuing to act almost until the end of his life. Chief Dan George passed away in 1981 at 82, in his sleep, at a hospital not far from the reserve where he was born. His son later said simply that he believed his father died of a broken heart. It's a bittersweet footnote to one of the most beloved performances in the film, proof that some of the best work in Hollywood came from a man who found his calling shockingly late in life. Bill McKinney, as Captain Terrell. He played Captain Terrell, the sadistic Union officer whose massacre of Josey's family sets the entire revenge plot in motion. The man audiences are supposed to hate from the very first scene. McKinney had already terrified moviegoers 4 years earlier as the Mountain Man in Deliverance, and Josey Wales cemented him as one of the era's most reliable movie villains. Eastwood liked him enough to cast him in 7 films total, nicknaming his group of go-to character actors the Malpaso Players. Off-screen, colleagues described him as warm and funny, reportedly a favorite on set precisely because he could switch instantly from menacing to hilarious between takes. McKinney kept working steadily for decades, showing up in everything from First Blood to Back to the Future Part the Third to The Green Mile. He died in December 2011 at age 80, and per his wishes, his ashes were scattered at sea. But here's a question worth asking. How many of the actors from this film do you think are actually still alive today? Keep that number in your head. The real answer might surprise you. Geraldine Keams as Little Moonlight. She played Little Moonlight, the young Navajo woman Josey and Lone Waddy rescue and take in. Geraldine Keams' very first film role, and she made it count. Keams was raised on the Navajo reservation in Arizona and studied drama at the University of Arizona before moving to New York to perform with a Native American theater ensemble. Josey Wales launched a career that quietly kept going for the next 5 decades, largely in television, and it's still going now. Here's the good news this video needed. Geraldine Keams is alive today, in her mid-70s, and working. In the last few years alone, she's appeared in Reservation Dogs, Rutherford Falls, and Dark Winds, three of the most acclaimed indigenous-led shows on television. The showrunner of Rutherford Falls reportedly called her Navajo royalty and said she was starstruck the moment Keams walked onto set. 50 years after Josey Wales, she's still working with some of the biggest names in the industry, and by all accounts, having the time of her career. John Vernon, as Fletcher, he played Fletcher, the Confederate officer forced to betray his own men to the Union, a role built entirely on guilt, and Vernon plays every second of it. John Vernon was actually Canadian, born in Saskatchewan, and had already made a career playing corrupt authority figures, most famously as the mayor endlessly frustrated by Dirty Harry a few years earlier. Josey Wales let him do something different, play a villain the audience could still feel sorry for. 2 years later, he'd become genuinely beloved for the exact opposite kind of role, terrorizing an entire fraternity as Dean Wormer in Animal House, a part so iconic it followed him for the rest of his career. Vernon kept working right up until the end, doing voice acting and animation and video games in his final years. He died on February 1, 2005, just weeks short of his 73rd birthday, from complications following heart surgery. He'd worked in Hollywood for nearly 50 years by the time he passed. Sondra Locke played Laura Lee. The young settler Josey ends up protecting on his journey west, and this role changed the entire direction of her life. Locke and Eastwood, both married to other people at the time, began a relationship on this set that would last 13 to 14 years and produce 6 movies together, including The Gauntlet, Bronco Billy, and Sudden Impact. For most of that time, she reportedly worked almost exclusively with Eastwood, stepping back from pursuing outside roles. When the relationship ended in 1989, it ended badly. Locke has said she came home to find the locks changed. What followed was one of the most public legal battles in Hollywood history, a palimony lawsuit, then a second lawsuit in 1995 alleging Eastwood had secretly sabotaged a directing deal meant to settle the first case. The trial drew testimony from both stars and became tabloid fodder for years. Locke was also battling breast cancer through much of this period, and her career never fully recovered from the years lost to litigation. She died on November 3, 2018, at her Los Angeles home, from cardiac arrest linked to cancer that had returned and spread to her bones. What made headlines almost as much as her death itself was the timing of the announcement. It wasn't made public for 6 weeks, and it broke on the same day one of Eastwood's own films premiered. She was 74. Fellow actresses, including Evan Rachel Wood, who Locke had directed as a child, publicly paid tribute to her. Sheb Wooley as Travis Cobb, 9-0 to 10-0. Let's lighten things up. Sheb Wooley played Travis Cobb, one of the bounty hunters hunting Josey Wales, but acting was actually his second career. Under his own name, Wooley had a genuine pop culture moment in 1958 with the novelty song The Purple People Eater, which shot to #1 and sold over 3 million copies. He also, almost accidentally, became one of the most reused sound effects in film history. Wooley is the voice behind the Wilhelm scream, the stock scream you've heard in hundreds of movies without realizing it. Later in life, he became a fixture of Hee-Haw as his drunken alter ego Ben Colder, recording comedic novelty songs for decades alongside his straight acting career in dozens of westerns. Wooley died on September 16, 2003, at 82, from complications of leukemia. Not a bad legacy for a farm kid from Oklahoma who started out as a rodeo rider. Notice something? This film's cast wasn't just actors. It was singers, rodeo riders, painters, even a tribal chief. That's part of why so many of these stories feel bigger than the movie itself. Matt Clark as Kelly. Matt Clark played Kelly, one of the outlaws riding with Josey Wales's ragtag band, a small but memorable part in a career built almost entirely on small but memorable parts. Clark became one of the most reliable character actors in American westerns for over 50 years, working with Robert Redford in Jeremiah Johnson, Paul Newman in The Life and Times of Judge Roy Bean, and Clint Eastwood again in The Beguiled and Honky Tonk Man. Younger audiences may know him best as Chester the bartender in Back to the Future Part the Third, or from his recurring role on the sitcom Grace Under Fire. His family later said he built his own house by hand and kept the same close friendships for 60 years, a quietly remarkable life for a man most people only recognize from the background of their favorite movies. This is where the then and now gets emotional for us. because Matt Clark isn't a story from decades ago. He died in March 2026 in Austin, Texas, at 89 years old, following complications after back surgery, meaning that for the vast majority of this movie's 50-year history, Matt Clark was still out there, quietly working. He appeared in over 120 films and TV shows across his lifetime, right up through 2014. So here's where that stands. Out of the actors you just watched, only 2 are confirmed alive today. Clint Eastwood, now 96 and reportedly retired after one of the greatest careers in film history, and Geraldine Keams, still acting, still working with some of the best new shows on television. Everyone else, the villains, the grandmothers, the outlaws, the chiefs, has passed on, most of them decades ago, some as recently as this year. 50 years later, the Outlaw Josey Wales still holds up as one of the great American westerns, but watching it now hits differently once you know what happened to the people in it. It's a snapshot of 24 lives that were just getting started, or already nearly finished, in the summer of 1976. Of everyone in this cast, whose story surprised you the most, Chief Dan George's Oscar nomination at 71, or Will Sampson's journey from the rodeo circuit to Hollywood in under 2 years? Let us know in the comments. If you enjoyed this trip back to 1976, hit like, subscribe for more then and now breakdowns, and tap the bell so you don't miss the next one.